The first time the night sky went noisy, Leora stood on the rooftop of her tenement, trying to coax a signal from her battered transceiver. The auroras that used to shimmer above gutted Manhattan were drowned in pale gray static, blinking and murmuring like a choir that had forgotten its hymn. Every dish on every balcony was spinning in blind circles, hunting for a clear channel. When the news feeds finally surfaced from the fog brief, stuttering and warped, people learned what had happened. A consortium of bereavement startups had quietly lofted thousands of nanosats into low Earth orbit. They called them Yarzai beacons, little shoeboxes stuffed with terabytes of curated memories, final messages, childhood vids, lullabies recorded for unborn grandchildren. Subscribers could upload an archive when a loved one died, then schedule an orbital broadcast on anniversaries. The satellites were supposed to whisper to gravestones and garden shrines below, projecting private remembrances to matching receivers. But demand had outrun design. The beacons overcrowded the radio spectrum, their autoplay loops bleeding into every frequency band. When they all lit up together on the first global Memorial Day, the planet's normal traffic weather telemetry, farm drone coordination, medical guidance, coastal early delivery guidance collapsed under the deluge of nostalgia. The corporations issued apologies. We never foresaw this volume of love, promised firmware patches, and then filed for bankruptcy when the lawsuits amassed. Governments bickered over who would pay to chase the debris, and the beacons kept humming, locked in a runaway timer, because nobody alive still held the master keys. For Leora, the haze of voices in the sky was more than inconvenience. It was responsibility. She had once been a grief hacker, the half-taboo occupation that blossomed after the pandemic decades. Families hired her to jailbreak proprietary mourning platforms, to reclaim a grandmother's cooking tutorial from a paywalled VR chapel, to remove advertising watermarks from a father's deathbed confession, to stitch a sister's selfie logs into a memorial that felt honest rather than algorithmically chipped. Leora never asked for permission from the platforms, and the platforms rarely managed to stop her. She believed sorrow should never be monetized. Now monetized sorrow was suffocating the airwaves. An emergency bulletin from the North Atlantic Food Coalition flickered across her cracked holopad while she sat in a laundromat aglow with silent televisions. Crop drones on Canada's prairie arc couldn't receive real-time wind data. Fields were yellowing. How can resistance turn a fool on him? She scrolled downward. Hospital microgrids in Nairobi misfiring, Icelandic geothermal plants desinking from the continental power frame, coastal evacuation sirens near Manila stuck in maintenance mode while a typhoon gathered, all because widows wanted to hear the timbre of a lost partner saying goodnight one more time. Something acidic curdled in Leora's stomach. She knew why people clung to those voices. She also knew what happened to civilizations that coddled heartbreak at the expense of the living, so she went hunting for a back door. The original beacon schematics were sequestered on defunct servers in what remained of Palo Alto. She pulled fragments through dusty mirror sites, reconstructed firmware trees, studied packet captures crowdsourced by angry ham Ledio operators. The more she read, the more she frowned. Each satellite ran a self-sealing archive, triple encrypted. Its broadcast schedule was hard-coded from the ground, spaced 15 minutes apart over a century, to match customary mourning cycles in every major religion. The designers had bragged, back in cheerful promotional videos, that not even a state actor could hijack a memory stream or overwrite a beloved's final testament. Challenge accepted, she told the empty room. Leora housed her gear in an abandoned subway control center. The breaker panels provided clean power, water pooled in an old switching pit. A family of raccoons kept her company. While algorithms churned across salvage servers, she pressed a silver locket against her lips, as she always did when stuck. Inside the locket lived the only backup of a message from her younger brother Micah, who died in the Appalachia floods. His voice was the reason she had learned to cut through corporate encryption in the first place. "I'm at peace, Lee. Promise me you'll find yours." Another sibling might have uploaded Micah to the beacons. Leora had refused. Peace, she believed, was not a recording in the sky, it was the capacity to keep breathing without it. After 3 weeks of brute forcing, Coffee grounds piling at her feet, Leora discovered a sliver in the code. The satellites authenticate each other once per orbit, trading hashes to verify no unauthorized firmware had infiltrated the chain. But a single variable update _ frequency was stored as an 8-bit integer. The designers figured no one would ever request updates faster than once every 256 seconds. They never imagined someone would inject a negative value, a negative frequency, interpreted by the satellite's ancient C libraries, became an unsigned integer so vast it wrapped to near infinity. The beacon would thus conclude it needn't check further credentials for millions of years. A neat way to blindfold the lock. All Leora had to do was transmit a handcrafted packet from a dish large enough to reach the swarm and small enough to avoid orbital debris trackers. Then she could claim root. That dish existed on the roof of the dormant Montauk Deep Space Array, left half disassembled after funding collapsed. Getting there required crossing 200 kilometers of infrastructure dead zones, where comms were silent, roads unlit, and the local militia suspicious of strangers. She packed light, a rucksack with solar tiles, a coil of fiber optic, a soldering pen, protein bricks, and the locket. At dawn, she flagged a freight tram to Queens, paid the engineer with antique lithium cells, and rode east. Outside the ride's graffiti-slashed windows, unharvested wheat bent brown in the wind, an early casualty of the drone failures. 2 checkpoints later, she reached the Long Island Barrens. Night arrived. The sky glimmered thousands of bruised orange pinpricks drifting in tangles, each one a beacon. When the memorial window opened at midnight, the air filled with whispers. Leora enfolded a portable wideband radio, tuned through the AM stack. She heard lullabies in Cantonese, an old Broadway chorus, the cough of a fisherman dying of blackwater fever, a toddler's first word. "I love you," sculpted from tears. Beautiful. Horrifying. She boxed the radio, wiped her eyes, marched on. The Montauk Array reared like a broken harpoon beyond dunes. Parabolic dishes jutted sideways, snowed over with bird guano. She scaled a service ladder, wrenched open a maintenance hatch, and stepped into the operations bay. Dust lay thick. Graffiti from teenagers who had used the dish as an art canvas read, "Earth 4G dead. Sky is crying." She powered up the control console with one of her cells. LEDs flickered. Static collapsed into the old interface. A dot matrix menu that welcomed her to the National Space Science Instrument. Somewhere deep in its directory, she found a manual satellite tracker. She keyed coordinates, positioned the dish, and watched as motors creaked alive, rotating the 40-meter bowl toward the zenith. Now the tricky part. She had code to send and a decision to make about its payload. Root access alone would let her mute the satellites. Governments would cheer, but billions who kept their morning anchors in orbit would revolt. Rioters had already burned municipal archives when local councils proposed memory rationing. She needed a bridge, not a guillotine. She brewed tea from dune grass and reread Micah's message. "I'm at peace. Promise me you'll find yours." What if, instead of silencing grief, she reframed it? The spectrum the satellites strangled was narrow band, better suited to text and compressed audio than full sensory VR. There was still room to share information if the torrents were trimmed. Leora wrote through the night, crafting a patch named turn_the_page. It performed 2 actions. 1. It inserted a compression module. Cut each memorial stream to 30 seconds, chosen randomly from its full archive. Enough for a passing hello, but not enough to hog the entire channel. 2. During the freed bandwidth slots, it broadcast concise survival guides. How to build a ceramic water filter from broken tile. How to identify black rot in maize. How to treat sepsis with locally available antibiotics. How to run a neighborhood mesh network on scavenged hardware. The guides were compiled from open humanitarian databases, reinserted to match the satellite's narrowband audio. She interleaved them with gentle chimes so that listeners would know when memory ended and instruction began. By dawn, she was ready. She toggled the dish's microwave amplifier, typed the negative update frequency into the handshake packet, and hit transmit. A slow hum saturated the bay. Through the porthole, she watched the satellites drift. One by one, their status LED and the tracker shifted from red to gold. Compromise accepted. She was inside. Leora pushed the firmware to the first 10 beacons, then the next 100, each infected one seeding the next. The network topology blossomed like frost. Within 2 hours, the entire swarm ran the page. She tuned a handheld radio to 1420 meets, the main leakage band. A hush, a hymn snippet. Remember me, even if... chime, then a crisp female voice. To prevent cholera in flood zones, boil water for at least 60 seconds. If fuel is scarce, construct a solar still as follows. Leora exhaled, knees trembling, but victory was fragile. At 9:14 Eastern, an encrypted call clawed onto the Montauk Array's ancient landline, the cables still half buried beneath the dunes. "This is Captain Jujun Ferreira of the United Coastal Defense Fleet," a stern voice said. "Identify yourself. You are operating an unlicensed transmission that interferes with classified spectrum. Defense Fleet." That meant warships parked off Montauk, guns pointed. Somehow her signal had pinged a military band. "I'm Leora Anwar, independent comms technician." She heard her own voice waver. "I'm repairing orbital congestion. You might have noticed improved throughput." "You altered sovereign property," Ferreira said. "Stand down. Await boarding." "If I stand down, the satellites revert in 40 minutes, she bluffed. "My session key must stay alive." "You'll lose navigational sync again, Captain. Your missiles will blind fire." Silence. A low rustle of crew behind him. "I see your point," he conceded. "However, your patch broadcasts survival instructions on open channels. Civilian ears will treat them as authoritative. If any error exists, casualties follow." "Who vetted your data?" "Doctors Without Borders. International Water Institute. Open source peer-reviewed." She imagined Marines crashing through the hatch, cables ripped, her servers smashed. She swallowed. "Look, Captain, I can add disclaimers. But the beacons were hurting us all. Let me push an update with your oversight." Ferreira sighed. "You've placed me in a quandary, Ms. Anwar. Legally, I must detain you. Practically, I respect what you've done." Another voice in the background, softer. "She's giving my hospital's bandwidth, Joa. Don't break her hand." Chief Medical Officer Ruiz Fariz said, "Reminds me that wounded sailors might prefer functional telemetry." A pause. "Very well. You will remain at Montauk under protective custody until we audit your code. No cuffs, provided you cooperate." "Deal," Leora said, and muted the line so he wouldn't hear her knees clatter. By noon, a skiff beached under the array. 4 Marines climbed the ladder. They carried rifles, but wore tourniquets as armbands, a sign of medics first. The eldest, Ruiz, shook Leora's hand. "Your guide's already saved a hypothermic deckhand. We owe you." They established a makeshift review station. Leora opened her repositories, walked them through each commit. Ruiz checked citations line by line. Ferreira, grudging, tested edge cases. They found 2 transcription typos. She fixed them. The satellites updated instantly. Word spread. A hastily organized governance council convened by video, agricultural unions, disaster NGOs, telecom regulators, faith leaders worried about sacrilege. Leora, hair matted from nights without showering, explained the page. When a cardinal objected that halving memorial length desecrated the dead, she countered, "If the living perish for want of knowledge, imagine the grief that followed." The council voted to let the patch stand for 90 days while experts developed a long-term spectrum sharing plan. Ferreira's fleet would guard the array in case saboteurs emerged. In the weeks that followed, humanity adjusted. People discovered they could still hear their loved ones, just glimpses, enough to remember, but now undo it with pragmatic wisdom. Farmers in the Sahel tuned tractor radios to 1420H and learned how to graft drought-resistant rootstock. Fisherfolk in the Indian Ocean heard tsunami alerts woven between lullabies. A child in Sao Paulo wrote Leora an email. "My dad's message says he believes in me. Then the lady teaches me how to disinfect rainwater." "I did it, My little brother stopped puking. Thank you. Memorial advocates, still wary, organized listening circles where communities gathered at dusk to hear whatever fragment emerged that hour. Grief became communal, not solitary. When the chime signaled the shift to survival tips, circle members took notes together. The boundary between mourning and action blurred in a way that felt, many said, like progress. But there was still the risk of reversion. A coalition of legacy investors who'd lost billions on the bankrupt Beacon startups wanted the old revenue model restored. They hired freelance cybermercs to write counterpatches. Every night, Leora and the fleet's small signal corps scanned for rogue uploads, blocking them. It was a battle of wits, but for once the side of public good had a head start. One evening, Ferreira handed Leora a sealed envelope. From Central Command, he said, neutral. Inside lay a formal offer. Chief Architect, Orbital Civil Band. Provisional rank, stipend, sovereign immunity for past infractions. Huh, Ani. Now, what job? Maintain turn_the_page. Develop second-generation satellites to separate memory from critical infrastructure permanently. Leora stared at the paper, then at the locket in her palm. Micah's recorded sigh rustled in her mind. Promise me you'll find yours. I accept, she told Ferreira. On 2 conditions. Name them. First, public domain licensing for every future survival guide. Reasonable. Second, when we design the new satellites, they shall carry an opt-out feature. Anyone who decides they no longer need the sky to remember may erase their archive. We don't owe eternity our entire bandwidth. Ferreira smiled with a hint of reverence. Spoken like someone who knows grief's gravity. Months passed. Under her blueprint, engineers launched companion-class microsats. Half memory pods, half civic library. They employed dynamic spectrum allocation, granting priority to disaster signals. Each carried a solar sail etched with the phrase, "We live, we learn, we let go" in 40 languages. On the first anniversary of the blackout, Leora climbed the array again. She keyed a diagnostic, all green. She tuned an earpiece to 1420 mean. Chime, a voice emerged. Her brother's. The system had finally cycled to his free public archive, though she'd never uploaded him. Someone else must have done so. Maybe a friend from the floods. Michael laughed, said, "Remember the time we tried to bake a moon pie and the oven exploded? It cut to static." Chime. Then a calm baritone instructed listeners how to cultivate mycelium protein in post-drought soil. She laughed and cried at the same time. Peace wasn't muting the past. It was letting the past take a seat beside the future, sharing the same stubborn orbit, and leaving enough room on the dial for hope.